Die, bitch. That's what Cadet First Class Dylan Mercer said right before he shoved her off the 12-story rooftop during what was supposed to be a routine training evolution. The other cadets laughed as she disappeared over the edge. Just another washed-up female trying to play soldier in a world that didn't want her. They had no idea that the woman they'd just tried to kill had survived 3 combat rotations in places they couldn't pronounce, or that the small compass rose tattooed behind her left ear was only given to operators who'd done things the Pentagon would never acknowledge. By the time Lieutenant Rhea Dalton's boots hit the safety net 2 floors down, she'd already decided it was time these kids learned what a real war looked like. But first, she had to figure out why someone wanted her dead badly enough to make it look like an accident. The Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado sits where the Pacific meets the sand, and on that particular October morning the fog rolled in thick enough to taste salt on your tongue. Lieutenant Rhea Dalton stood at parade rest outside Building 164, her boots planted in the same spot where she'd once puked her guts out during Hell Week 7 years prior. She was 29 now, lean and compact at 5'6", with the kind of stillness that made people nervous without understanding why. Her dark hair was pulled back tight in a regulation bun, and her eyes were the color of slate, flat, unreadable, measuring everything. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not as an instructor, not after what happened in Kandahar. The Btch candidates filed past her in their wet fatigues, teeth chattering, bodies shaking from the cold Pacific water. They'd just been ordered to crawl through for the 3rd time that morning. They didn't look at her. Most of them didn't even know who she was yet. To them, she was just another officer with too many ribbons on her chest and not enough scars showing. Commander Nathan Voss stood 20 feet away, arms crossed, watching her watch the candidates. He was old-school Navy, 48 years in, with a face like weathered rope and eyes that had seen things most people only read about in declassified documents 30 years after the fact. He'd known Rhea since she was a boot-in-sign fresh out of Annapolis, back when she still smiled occasionally. He noticed the way her left hand kept drifting to touch the skin behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd picked up after Syria. There was something there, a small tattoo she never talked about, and he'd learned not to ask. The candidates kept moving. Rhea counted them. 43 left from the original class of 112. In 2 weeks, maybe 20 would remain. Commander Voss walked over, his boots crunching on the gravel. He told her the cadets from the Naval Academy Preparatory School would be arriving that afternoon for their annual orientation visit. 17 of them, including a few who thought they already knew everything worth knowing about warfare because they'd read some books and done some push-ups. His voice carried a warning she understood immediately. If you're here to find the viewer from Rawalpindi, Pakistan watching this story unfold, know that what happened next would test everything Rhea Dalton thought she'd left behind in the mountains east of Kabul. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, do it now, because this story doesn't end the way you think it will. Rhea nodded once, sharp and professional, but her jaw tightened. She touched the tattoo again without realizing it. That small compass rose that only 37 people in the entire U.S. military were authorized to wear. The fog swallowed the last of the candidates as they disappeared toward the obstacle course. And somewhere in the distance, a bell rang twice. Someone had quit. Do not use quotation marks anywhere in the story. Rhea's father had been a Marine Corps sniper in Desert Storm, the kind of man who measured the world in meters and wind speed. He'd taught her to shoot when she was 9 years old, not with some .22 rifle for kids, but with his old M40A1 on a makeshift range behind their house in rural Montana. He told her that precision wasn't about strength, it was about control, patience, and the ability to shut out everything that didn't matter. By the time she was 14, she could put 5 rounds through the same hole at 300 meters. He died when she was 16. Lung cancer from the burn pits in Kuwait. He made her promise 2 things before the morphine took him under for the last time: get out of Montana, and never let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. She kept both promises. Annapolis broke her down and rebuilt her, and she graduated near the top of her class. She volunteered for BRDOS despite every senior officer advising against it, telling her the failure rate was too high, the culture too hostile, the physical demands beyond what most women could endure. She made it through on her 2nd attempt, one of only 4 women to ever earn the Trident at that point. They assigned her to a platoon in SEAL Team 3, and she spent the next 5 years proving herself in ways that left scars no one could see. But it was Kandahar province in 2022 that defined her, redefined her. The operation had no official name because it never officially happened. Her platoon was tasked with interdicting a high-value target moving through the Arghandab River Valley, but the intelligence was bad, deliberately bad, they found out later. The convoy they hit wasn't enemy combatants. It was a civilian transport carrying medical supplies and 2 NGO workers. Her team leader, Lieutenant Marcus Brooks, realized the mistake 3 seconds too late. He called the abort, but the junior sniper had already fired. One of the NGO workers, a 24-year-old woman from Oregon, died instantly. Brooks took full responsibility. He filed the report, faced the inquiry, and ate the consequences. Rhea watched him do it because that's what leaders did. They protected their people, even when it destroyed them. 6 months later, Brooks ate his sidearm in his apartment in Virginia Beach. The Navy ruled it a suicide unrelated to service. Rhea knew better. She requested assignment to the Naval Special Warfare Center 3 weeks after his funeral. She told her commanding officer she wanted to train the next generation to be better than she was, to think harder before they pulled triggers. What she didn't tell him was that she'd made a vow standing over Brooks's grave, one she whispered into the cold Virginia wind. She would make sure no one else carried the guilt that killed him. The compass rose tattoo behind her ear had been Brooks's call sign. True Bloom, it meant someone who always found their way home, no matter how lost they got. She had it inked the day after they buried him, and she touched it every time she felt herself slipping back into the valley where the woman from Oregon had died screaming. That was who Rhea Dalton was when the Naval Academy prep cadets arrived that October afternoon. She wasn't there to teach them how to be warriors. She was there to teach them how to stay human while doing inhuman things. Do not use quotation marks anywhere in the story. Cadet First Class Dylan Mercer stepped off the bus with the kind of swagger that comes from never being told no. He was 22, 6'2", and built like someone who spent more time in the weight room than the library. His father was a 2-star general at the Pentagon, and everyone at the prep school knew it, because Dylan made sure they did. He had 3 younger brothers who worshipped him, and a mother who called him her golden boy. He'd been accepted to Annapolis on a full recommendation, and in his mind, the Navy existed to give him a stage. He saw Rhea standing near the compound entrance, arms crossed, observing the cadets as they formed up. He leaned over to his buddy, Cadet Second Class Jason Hartwick, and said something that made them both laugh. Hartwick was shorter, wary, the kind of guy who fed off Mercer's energy because he had none of his own. They'd been roommates for 2 years, and Hartwick had learned that life was easier when you agreed with everything Dylan said. Commander Voss briefed the cadets in the assembly hall, explaining that they'd be participating in a condensed 3-day evolution designed to give them a realistic preview of what Btch demanded. He introduced Lieutenant Dalton as their primary instructor for the duration. She stood off to the side, expression neutral, hands clasped behind her back. Voss mentioned her service record in passing multiple deployments, decorated combat veteran, experienced operator, but he didn't elaborate. That was intentional. Rhea had asked him not to. Mercer raised his hand before Voss finished. He asked if Lieutenant Dalton had actually been deployed in a combat role or if she'd been support staff. The room went quiet. Voss's face hardened, but before he could respond, Rhea spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, level, almost bored. She told Mercer that his question would be answered by the end of the week, and if he had any others he could save them for after he completed the first training evolution. Mercer smirked. Hartwick snickered. A few other cadets exchanged glances. The first test came that afternoon on the obstacle course. It wasn't the standard Btch course. It was a modified version designed to evaluate decision-making under physical stress. Rhea walked them through it once, explaining each station, the time limits, the standards. She demonstrated the rope climb, the wall traverse, the underwater knot tying drill. She made it look effortless, mechanical, like her body was just a tool she used when necessary. Mercer went first. He attacked the course with raw aggression, muscling through the obstacles, finishing in 14 minutes, a respectable time for someone unfamiliar with the layout. When he came off the final platform, breathing hard, he looked at Rhea and asked if she could beat that. She told him she wasn't there to compete. She was there to teach. He called her ma'am, but the way he said it made it sound like an insult. That night in the barracks, the cadets talked. Mercer held court, sitting on his bunk, telling anyone who'd listened that Dalton was probably some desk officer who'd never seen real action, that the Navy was pushing diversity hires into instructor roles to meet quotas, that she'd probably cry if they actually pushed her. Hartwick agreed loudly. A few others laughed, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge him. But Cadet Third Class Angela Wilson, a quiet woman from Ohio with a brother in the Marine Corps, didn't laugh. She sat on her bunk, cleaning her rifle, and told Mercer he didn't know what he was talking about. Mercer asked her if she was planning to cry too when things got hard. Wilson didn't respond. She just went back to her rifle. The next morning, Rhea announced they'd be doing a 12-mile ruck march with full packs, followed by a navigation exercise in the coastal hills, followed by a timed combat swim. No breaks. No exceptions. Mercer asked if she'd be doing it with them. She told him yes. She'd be doing it first, alone, and she'd be waiting for them at the finish line. Do not use quotation marks anywhere in the story. Rhea sat alone in her quarters that night, staring at the photograph she kept in her locker. It was creased and faded. showing Lieutenant Brooks and the rest of her platoon in Kandahar, squinting against the sun, weapons slung, exhausted but still standing. Brooks had his arm around her shoulder, grinning like they'd just gotten away with something they had in a way. That photo was taken 3 days before the convoy. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From anger. She'd seen men like Mercer before, boys, really, who thought warfare was about dominance and volume, who believed rank and muscle mass were the same thing as competence. The military bred them, promoted them, protected them until they got someone killed. Brooks had been trying to train one of them when the convoy happened. The junior sniper who fired too early had been just like Mercer, arrogant, impulsive, convinced his instincts were better than his orders. She set the photo down and pressed her palms against her eyes, hard enough to see stars. The memory came anyway, the way it always did when she was tired, the Arghandab River Valley. The dust in her mouth, the crackling radio, Brooks's voice sharp and urgent, calling the abort, the rifle shot echoing off the canyon walls, the woman from Oregon slumping forward in the passenger's seat, her head snapping back, blood spraying across the windshield. Ree had been 20 meters away, prone on a ridgeline, watching through her optic. She'd seen everything. She'd radioed Brooks immediately, confirming the mistake, trying to give him time to salvage it. But you couldn't salvage something like that. You could only carry it. She stood up, grabbed her running shoes, and walked out into the night. She ran the perimeter of the compound 6 miles in 42 minutes, pushing until her lungs burned and her legs screamed. Pain was clarifying. It reminded her she was still here, still breathing, still capable of doing something that mattered. When she finally stopped, bent over with her hands on her knees, gasping for air, she thought about Mercer's face when he'd asked if she could beat his time. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, dismissive and condescending, like she was an obstacle to his inevitable success. She straightened up, wiped the sweat from her face, and made a decision. She wouldn't embarrass him. She'd educate him. There was a difference, and it was the difference between vengeance and leadership. Brooks had taught her that. If Mercer had any capacity for growth, any willingness to learn, she'd find it. And if he didn't, she'd make sure he understood exactly why he didn't belong here. For Brooks, she thought. For the woman from Oregon. For every person who'd ever been underestimated by someone who confused cruelty with strength. She walked back to her quarters, showered, and slept for 4 hours without dreaming. Do not use quotation marks anywhere in the story. The 12-mile ruck march began at 04:30 under a sky still dark and heavy with coastal fog. Rhea stood at the starting line in full kit, 50-pound pack, weapon, helmet, plate carrier, and when Commander Voss blew the whistle, she moved out at a pace that made the cadets glance at each other nervously. She didn't run. She didn't need to. She just walked with a rhythm that ate up ground, her boots striking the pavement in a steady cadence that never wavered. The cadets started 30 minutes after her, following the same route through the hills east of Coronado. Mercer led the pack initially, setting a punishing pace to prove something to everyone watching. Hartwick struggled to keep up. Wilson stayed in the middle, controlled and steady, rationing her energy. Rhea finished the march in 2 hours and 38 minutes. She dropped her pack at the checkpoint, drank water, and waited. The first cadet started arriving 40 minutes later, stumbling, gasping, legs shaking. Mercer came in fifth, his face red and contorted with effort. He'd pushed too hard, too early, and now he was paying for it. When he saw Rhea standing there, calm and composed, he looked away. She gave them 10 minutes to recover, then briefed the navigation exercise. They'd be moving in teams of 3 through the coastal hills using only map and compass, no GPS, no phones, no digital aids. Each team had 6 checkpoints to locate within 4 hours. The terrain was brutal, steep inclines, thick brush, loose rock. She told them the exercise was designed to simulate operating in denied environments where technology failed and judgment mattered. Mercer's team included Hartwick and a quieter cadet named Rodriguez. Wilson's team had 2 others who actually listened to her. Rhea assigned herself as a roving observer, moving independently to monitor their progress and decision-making. The evolution started well enough. Most teams made their first 2 checkpoints without issue. But the 3rd checkpoint was deliberately placed in a location that required crossing a narrow ravine with unstable footing. Rhea watched from an elevated position as Mercer's team approached. She saw him studying the map, arguing with Rodriguez about the route. Mercer wanted to go straight down and across. Rodriguez suggested a longer but safer route around the north side. Mercer ignored him and started down. Hartwick followed immediately. Rodriguez hesitated, then complied. Halfway across, Mercer lost his footing on the loose shale. He went down hard, his ankle twisting beneath him. He cursed loudly, trying to stand, but the moment he put weight on it, he collapsed again. Hartwick panicked, freezing in place. Rodriguez moved immediately to Mercer's side, assessing the injury, calling for support. Rhea descended from her position, reaching them in under 2 minutes. She knelt next to Mercer, ignoring his protests, and examined the ankle. It wasn't broken, but it was a moderate sprain, painful and destabilizing. She told Rodriguez to improvise a splint using trekking poles and paracord. While Rodriguez worked, she asked Mercer a single question. She asked him why he'd chosen the direct route despite Rodriguez's recommendation. Mercer, through gritted teeth, told her it was faster. She asked him if it was still faster now that he couldn't walk. He didn't answer. She stood up, addressed all three of them, and explained that speed without judgment was just recklessness wearing a different name. She told them the exercise would continue, but Mercer's team would now have to carry him to the remaining checkpoints or withdraw entirely. The choice was theirs. Hartwick immediately suggested withdrawal. Rodriguez looked at Mercer, then at Rio, and said they'd continue. They rigged a makeshift litter using their packs and trekking poles. For the next 3 hours, Rodriguez and Hartwick carried Mercer through the hills, struggling under the added weight, falling behind every other team. Rio shadowed them, watching Rodriguez take charge, making rote decisions, rationing water, keeping them moving. Hartwick complained constantly. Mercer said nothing, his face pale with pain and something that looked like shame. They missed the time limit by 47 minutes, but they finished. When they reached the final checkpoint, Rodriguez and Hartwick collapsed. Mercer tried to stand on his own and fell again. Ria stood over them, her expression unreadable. She told them they'd failed the navigation exercise by every measurable standard. Then she told them Rodriguez had passed something more important. He'd demonstrated the one quality that separated operators from casualties. He'd adapted when the plan failed and kept his team alive. She looked directly at Mercer when she said that. That night, the cadets were given a 4-hour rest period before the combat swim. Mercer sat in the medical tent, his ankle wrapped, ice pack numbing the swelling. Wilson came in to check on him, not because she liked him, but because that's what team members did. She asked him if he was planning to swim. He told her he didn't have a choice. If he withdrew now, it would go on his record. She nodded, then told him something her brother had said after his first deployment. The guys who survived weren't the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who listened and learned before it was too late. Mercer looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't have anything to say. Do not use quotation marks anywhere in the story. The combat swim began at 200 hours under a moonless sky. The Pacific was 58 degrees, cold enough to induce hypothermia in under 30 minutes without a wetsuit. The cadets wore standard cold water gear, but the shock still hit them like a wall when they entered the surf. The evolution required them to swim 2 miles parallel to the shore, navigate to a designated point, dive to retrieve a weighted object from 15 feet, and return. Ria went in first, as she had with every other exercise. She entered the water without hesitation, her stroke smooth and mechanical, her breathing controlled. The cadets watched her disappear into the darkness, a small infrared chem light marking her position for the safety boats. Mercer was among the last to enter, his injured ankle throbbing despite the numbing effect of the cold water. Swimming neutralized some of the weight-bearing issues, but the pain was still there, sharp and insistent. He pushed through it, focusing on his stroke, trying to keep pace with the others. 30 minutes into the swim, one of the cadets, a kid named Torres, started struggling. His breathing became erratic, his stroke sloppy. Wilson, swimming nearby, noticed immediately. She called out to him, asking if he could continue. Torres gasped something about cramping, his legs seizing up. He started to panic, thrashing, taking in water. Wilson grabbed him, fighting to keep his head above water. She screamed for the safety boat, but they were 200 meters out, too far to reach quickly. Torres was dead weight now, dragging her down. She tried to maintain her grip, but the cold was sapping her strength. Then Ria was there. She turned back the moment she heard the shout, covering the distance in under 90 seconds. She reached Wilson and Torres, immediately assessing the situation. She ordered Wilson to let go and focus on staying afloat. Wilson hesitated. Letting go felt like abandoning him, but she obeyed. Ria secured Torres in a cross-chest carry, a rescue technique that kept his airway clear while minimizing resistance. She started towing him toward the shore, her stroke powerful and methodical, her breathing never breaking rhythm. The safety boat finally reached them, pulling Torres aboard. The medic started evaluating him while Ria held onto the side of the boat, catching her breath. The boat captain, a grizzled master chief named Kowalski, looked down at her and asked if she wanted a lift. She told him no, she had a swim to finish. She let go of the boat and turned back toward the designated navigation point. Kowalski shook his head, muttering something about stubborn seals, and radioed the other safety boats to keep eyes on her. Ria completed the full evolution, retrieving the weighted object from depth and returning to shore. By the time she walked out of the surf, most of the cadets were already out, wrapped in thermal blankets, shivering and exhausted. Torres was stable, suffering from muscle cramps and mild hypothermia, but otherwise fine. Mercer was sitting on the sand staring at her. He'd finished the swim despite his ankle, but it had taken everything he had. His face was pale, his jaw tight. When Rhea walked past him, he stood up, ignoring the pain, and did something he'd never done before in his life. He apologized. He told her he'd been wrong about her, that he'd underestimated her because he was arrogant and stupid, that he'd risked his team because he cared more about looking strong than being strong. Rhea stopped, turned, and looked at him for a long moment. The entire group was watching now, waiting to see how she'd respond. She told him apologies were easy. Growth was hard. Then she asked him a single question. Did he understand why Rodriguez had carried him through the hills when he could have left him behind? Mercer nodded slowly. He said it was because Rodriguez understood that teams don't leave people behind, even when they're injured, even when they're difficult, even when it costs them. Rhea nodded once, sharp and final. She told him to remember that feeling the next time he was tempted to measure someone's worth by their appearance or background. Then Commander Voss stepped forward from where he'd been observing silently. He told the cadets to gather round, that there was something they needed to know about Lieutenant Dalton. He explained that Rhea Dalton was one of only 12 operators in the entire Navy who'd earned the Navy Cross for actions in direct combat, that she'd served 3 rotations with SEAL Team 3, conducting high-risk operations in some of the worst environments on Earth, that the small compass rose tattoo behind her ear was True Bloom, the call sign of the team leader she'd served under, a man who'd given everything to protect his people. He told them that Rhea had requested assignment to the training center not because she'd washed out or couldn't hack it anymore, but because she believed the greatest service she could offer was teaching the next generation to be better than the last. The silence that followed was absolute. Mercer stood there, his face burning with shame and something that might have been respect. Wilson looked at Rhea with open admiration. Even Hartwick seemed chastened, his usual smirk gone. Rhea didn't acknowledge any of it. She simply told them to get warm, get food, and get rest. They had one more day of training, and it would be harder than anything they'd done so far. As the cadets dispersed, Mercer approached her one more time. He asked her what Brooks would have thought of him. Rhea looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the arrogance to the scared kid underneath, who just wanted to prove he belonged. She told him Brooks would have given him the same chance she was giving him now, the opportunity to become someone worth following. Do not use quotation marks anywhere in the story. The final day of training was a 12-hour evolution that combined everything they'd learned: navigation, endurance, problem solving under stress, and teamwork. Rhea designed it to be passable but difficult, the kind of test that revealed character rather than just competence. Mercer's ankle was still swollen, but he refused medical withdrawal. He moved slower than the others, but he moved with purpose now, listening when Rodriguez suggested alternate routes, deferring to Wilson when she identified better timing for water breaks. The arrogance wasn't gone entirely. That kind of personality didn't disappear overnight, but it was tempered, shaped by 3 days of humility and pain. They all finished. Some faster than others, but they all crossed the line. Commander Voss held the debrief in the same assembly hall where they'd started. He congratulated them on completing the evolution, then spent 20 minutes breaking down their mistakes with brutal honesty. When he finished, he asked Lieutenant Dalton if she had anything to add. Rhea stood up, walked to the front, and told them about Brooks. She told them about the convoy in Kandahar, about the woman from Oregon, about the decision Brooks had made to take responsibility even though it destroyed him. She told them that warfare wasn't about glory or proving how tough you were. It was about carrying weight that would break most people and still making decisions that saved lives. She told them that every person in that room would face a moment when the plan fell apart, when the intelligence was wrong, when someone they cared about was in danger, and they had to choose between protocol and instinct. She told them that the only way to survive those moments was to train so hard, think so clearly, and trust your team so completely that the right decision became instinctive. She told them that's what she was there to teach. Not how to be warriors, how to be leaders worth following into hell. The room was silent when she finished. Even Mercer, who'd spent 3 days convinced he knew everything, was listening like his life depended on it. 2 weeks later, official reprimands were filed against Mercer and Hartwick for their behavior on the rooftop during the first day. That joke that had nearly killed Rhea when they shoved her over the edge. The investigation revealed it hadn't been sanctioned by any training protocol. It had been a hazing incident that violated about 15 different regulations. Mercer was suspended from prep school for 1 semester. Hartwick was expelled entirely, but Mercer requested a meeting with Rhea before he left. They met in her office, a small space overlooking the training compound. He stood at attention, formal and stiff, and told her he didn't expect forgiveness. He told her he was going to use the suspension to get his head right, to figure out why he'd thought dominance and cruelty were the same thing as strength. He told her that when he came back, If they let him come back, he'd be someone Brooks would have been proud to lead. Rhea nodded. She told him she believed him. Then she gave him a book, a worn copy of Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield, the story of the Spartans at Thermopylae. It had been Brooks's favorite. She told Mercer to read it and understand why the greatest warriors in history weren't the ones who fought for glory, but the ones who fought for the men standing next to them. Mercer took the book, thanked her, and left. Wilson stayed on for additional training, eventually earning a recommendation for Annapolis and a guaranteed Btch slot upon graduation. She kept in touch with Rhea, sending updates from every stage of her career. Years later, she'd make it through Hell Week and earn her trident, becoming one of the few women to complete the program. When she did, she sent Rhea a photo of herself standing in front of the Btch compound giving a thumbs up. On the back, she'd written for Brooks, "For you, for everyone who believed we could." Rhea kept that photo next to the one of Brooks and the platoon in Kandahar. Two moments years apart, connected by the same thread, the belief that people could be better than their worst moments if someone gave them the chance. She stayed at the Naval Special Warfare Center for 4 more years, training hundreds of candidates, pushing them harder than they thought possible, teaching them that true strength wasn't about domination, it was about resilience, adaptation, and the courage to admit when you were wrong. On quiet mornings when the fog rolled in thick and the compound was still, she'd walk to the spot where she'd stood that first day, watching the candidates file past. She'd touch the compass rose behind her ear and remember Brooks's voice telling her that everyone gets lost sometimes, but the good ones always find their way home. She'd made it home, and now she was making sure others could too.